we need to do is dig deeper into the Word, and that's what we've been doing on our Wednesday night class. It's who is this Christ? It's a study of Christ, right? Christology, all right? So this is our 7th lesson in who is this Christ? All right, anybody remember what we did last time? The titles, the titles of who he was, and what the last one that we talked about, the idea of him being the Son of God. We talked about the concept of the Messiah, the concept of Lord, the concept of the Son of Man, what that means. You know, we heard that referred to so often in John. That's how he refers to himself, right? The Son of Man. He's referred to as the Son of Man. So we talked about that a little bit, and we kind of finished that out last time I was here on a Wednesday night. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch gears and we're going to go into something else. And part of this, one of the titles of Christ was Messiah. And not just Messiah, but the Messiah. There were several Messiah figures throughout the Bible, right? There are many, the idea of one who would lead a deliverer, okay? We know that Joshua was a Messiah, but he was not the Messiah. That definite article at the beginning of that is kind of important, right? I could say, I want you to go out and get I want you to go and get a car, or I could say, I want you to go out and get the car. And when I say the car, it's specific. It's exclusive to one particular car that I want you to go out and get. All right. So the idea of the Messiah, the one true Messiah, one that is to come, one that is to fulfill a particular purpose, and all of these things, that's something we kind of need to talk about. What is this, the idea of Messiah? Well, tonight and probably next week, we're going to talk about forgive me if it gets too technical or complicated. Just tell me to elaborate, and I'll be happy to. It's messianic expectations in the first century. Now we think, this is one of those papers that people write that nobody reads, and it's in some journal somewhere. That's not what it is. Okay, I promise. We're going to make it a little bit more interesting than that. So what do you think of the idea of messianic expectation in the first century? What does that mean? What could that possibly be? It is. But what might this mean? Messianic expectations. What does it mean? Okay. What did the first century, and we've got plenty of what happened in the first century. We have lots and lots of work that was produced at that time. The idea of what were the expectations of this Messiah? How was he going to manifest himself? What was he going to represent? What would he do? We're going to see here in a couple minutes, there's several different expectations. Some thought he was going to come in this way. Some thought he was going to come in this way. And it's interesting that in many cases they were both correct, but both very, very wrong. One of the problems is people did not want to temper their expectations. Okay. They saw it as a certain way, and then when Christ did not represent as they thought he would, they rejected him as Messiah. Okay? Well, he's not the Messiah because he's not doing what we thought he would do. Well, there's a problem, right? There's a disconnect there when you reject something simply because it doesn't fit up to your expectations. Where's the problem in that? Where can there be an issue when we disregard something simply because it doesn't fit up to our expectations? Typically, that's what happens, right? We're expecting the wrong thing. Our human mindset is kind of running at overload, and we have an expectation of something, and then when that something doesn't fit with what we think it should, we discard it. Yeah.
They thought they were going to set up an earthly kingdom, and it was all spiritual. They had no conception, even though the Old Testament prescribed, but they still thinking of an earthly kingdom. When they talk about the spiritual, they could not think of that.
It's interesting because they were thinking, and see, once again, they were both right and wrong.
Right.
Okay, they expected an earthly kingdom, and is the church an earthly kingdom? Well, we're here on this earth. In that aspect, we are here. We live on this earth. But what kind of kingdom is it really? Is it one where there's a border and there's a national anthem and there's a flag that we fly and all of these things? That's not the kind of kingdom, though, is it? So it is an earthly kingdom in that it exists on this earth. It was established on this earth. wasn't established in heaven. It was established here. It was established in a particular city on a particular day by men who spoke audible words that came out of their mouth. So in that aspect, it is very much a fleshly kingdom in that we are living on this earth. It's made up of human beings. But what kind of kingdom is it really? It's a spiritual kingdom, right? Because not only are we looking at the human aspect of us, we're also talking about, what does it say? There was added to them 3,000 souls. That's a big difference. The souls were added to the church. Okay? The physical body can be done away with, but the soul remains. And when this physical world is done with, what's going to remain? The church and all of the souls that are contained therein. Christ is going to come back to receive souls, not physical bodies to himself. Good evening. He's going to come back to receive souls to himself. And we're going to go and we're going to live in eternity with the Christ that died for our sins. But it's our souls that are going to live, not the physical kingdom. It's a spiritual kingdom. So there is very much a disconnect between our expectations. It also means oftentimes that we're going to miss out on something that's really great. How many people have rejected the gospel of Christ because it doesn't fit with what they expect it to fit with? You know, I thought that when I became a Christian, this would happen. I thought when I became a Christian, this would occur. I thought when I became a Christian, there would be this kind of relationship. Well, guess what? When our expectations don't match up with the reality, many times we become discouraged and we discard everything. And there's been plenty of people who have done that over the years, right? Yep.
Doesn't think what they think it ought to be,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
and so they get enchanted. Well, this is not what I expect.
And there's a lot of people who prey on that. The idea of the health and wealth gospel. You know, if you become a Christian, you're going to be healthy. You're not going to get sick. If you are sick, you'll be miraculously healed. You'll never have to worry about anything because God's going to take care of all your physical needs. In other words, physical wants, not needs, but wants. God's going to take. You're going to live your life to its fullest. Unfortunately, their expectation is not really what matches up with what we find in Scripture. You know, does a Christian get sick? Yeah. Do faithful, good, godly Christian people get sick? Do they die? Yeah, of course they do. Do they lose their jobs? Are they poor? Yeah. I mean, to sit there and say because you're a Christian that none of these things will happen is doing a tremendous disservice to the people that we're trying to minister to and to God himself, because it appears that God's a liar, and God's not a liar. He didn't say that. He never said you're never going to have to worry again. He said you shouldn't worry because I'm going to take care of you, but I'm going to give you what you need. I look at Paul. Paul was, you know, he's one of those pillars of the church, but the man was beaten, he was shipwrecked, he was scourged, he was put in prison. He was eventually executed for his beliefs. Well, that kind of flies in the face of the idea about, well, when you become a Christian, nothing bad happens. And you'll be well. I mean, the man didn't have any money. I mean, he was kind of going around, he was having to act as a tent maker to make ends meet because, you know, he said, I don't want to be a burden to anybody. He says, I don't want anybody to think I'm using my position to become wealthy. Yeah. And there's been so much speculation as to what that thorn is. There's no telling. But whatever it was, he prayed for 3 times for it to be taken away. And God said, no, my grace is sufficient for you. My grace will take care of you. Don't worry about this. I'm not going to take this away. And, it's one of those things, man, it puzzles me. I would really like to know what it is. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because when I read that and when God says, I'm not going to take this away from you, my grace is sufficient, he's speaking to me. You know, whatever the thorn in my flesh is, whatever, if it's a physical ailment or whether it's an emotional issue or whatever it might be, I know that God's grace is sufficient for me. He's saying that to me. He doesn't withhold his grace simply because I'm not Paul. Okay, so I'm going to be blessed. God's going to take care of me. I'm not going to have to worry about that. And quit asking for something that's not going to happen. Yep. Take this cup from me. Take this cup from me. But he was obedient to death. Okay, so we have a better understanding about what happens when there's a disconnect between our expectation and what the reality is. Well, we're going to find that during the intertestamental, remember we did that big study on the intertestamental period? I did a lot more, I couldn't give everything there was. There's just so much information, but I went back and looked a little bit at the intertestamental period, because it was during this intertestamental period that the concept, the idea of the Messiah, really kind of went through a change, and it was a rapid change during this intertestamental period. During the time of the last of the prophets, Malachi, and then the coming of John the Immerser, John the Baptizer, the idea of the Messiah kind of went through this change. It evolved. And it's kind of interesting how it evolved and why it evolved. You would think, well, God's prophecy, especially in the idea of Isaiah and the book of Isaiah and the book of Daniel and the book of Ezekiel, you would think, well, they had that. Why would it change so much? Well, because there were other people that were writing during that time. We talked about the book of Maccabees. All right. I don't know of a mainstream group of people that believe that is an inspired book of the Bible in any way, shape, or form. But it does contain a great deal of information that we can look to see try to figure out, why did they come up with these ideas? Where did they come up with this concept of the Messiah? Not Jesus. Now understand this. Jesus was a long way in the future. The idea of the Messiah, why did they think of it like that? Why did they come up with that idea? Why would they ascribe these kind of qualities to the Messiah and not this? Why would they see him as being this way and not this way? So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit. One of the reasons that it underwent this change, it was the evolution of the Jewish state at the time. All right, the Jewish nation was in a great deal of turmoil, wasn't it, during the intertestamental period? All right, remember the Jews were allowed to come home by Cyrus the Great. Okay. Cyrus said, I'm going to let you go back home. And we read in Scripture where God was the one that told Cyrus to do that. Cyrus wasn't just acting out of the goodness of his heart. God had prophesied that this was going to occur. They were going to be taken away, and then they were going to be returned back to their homeland. They were going to be released to go back home. Okay, so as they're going back home, they're in a great deal of flux, because they're going back home, and their homeland's not what it used to be, is it? What's happened to their homeland while they've been gone? Yeah, well, for one thing, we know that the temple and Jerusalem were basically, right? They were destroyed. The temple was in really pretty much ruins, which kind of gives a little bit of clarity to Jesus' statement about, in 3 days I will destroy this temple. Okay, this temple will be destroyed. When he said that, there were a lot of people there who what are they thinking in their minds? They're thinking of the physical temple, right? Temple of Jerusalem, the Herod's temple, this structure that was so important in their lives. What do you mean he's going to destroy the temple? And they thought, he's thinking of some kind of great vandalism. Of course, that's not what he was talking about, was it? All right. What's that? He's talking about his body. But you can see once again where what you expect doesn't match up with what happens. All of a sudden, what was he talking? Where does this come from? Why is he talking like this? Why did he use that kind of phraseology? What would that do to him? Okay, so there's a great deal of flux going on with the Jewish nation. All right, they're coming back home. They're moving back into their homeland. They're finding that, guess what's happened? The Samaritans have kind of come in. They've taken a little bit of their homeland out. They're coming back home. They're strangers in their own homeland. They're coming back to their towns and their cities where, this was my grandfather's home or my grandmother's home or our family home, but we can't live there anymore because somebody else is living in it. Remember, that was the prophecy, right? You're going to work for things that are going to be taken away from you. All right, you're going to take yourself a wife that someone else you're not going to be able to be with because somebody else is going to have her. This was prophesied to them. This is what's going to happen to them. So they're coming back home, and all of these prophecies that have been foretold about their being driven out of their homeland and then coming back home, it's coming to pass. So here's two things. One, the change that we're talking about here, this change in the concept of a Messiah. It took place in two different places. All right. Number one, it was actually happening in Palestine. All right, to the Jews who actually were living in the area. All right. Number two, the Jews living, I'll just put under the diaspora. What's the diaspora? the dispersion. Okay? Because what happened to the Jews that were taken away? Did all of them go back home? No. Many of them, their whole families were there. They said, we don't want to go. We don't know Judah as a homeland. I've never lived there. A lot of people, they became very accustomed to Greek ways, and they began to kind of assimilate themselves, and so they just never went back home. Is there anything wrong with that? No. If you were a Jew, you didn't have to live in Israel. Yeah. That's right. Streets that are there that weren't there before, businesses that were there, places that old family homes that used to be there, they're gone. They're a neighborhood, right? Yep. I remember going back to, we lived in Warner Robins until I was 10, and it was soon after Heather and I got married, we just said, I want to go down, it's not that far, it's an hour and a half down, so we drove down, and I couldn't find my way around. And I thought, because I knew exactly, if I turn here, I turn there. Guess what? A lot of stuff's changed. A lot of places that were there are no longer there. A lot of things that weren't there are, they've got shopping centers and beautiful subdivisions and all that stuff. I don't recognize the place. And the longer you're gone, these people weren't gone for 2 or 3 years, remember? They weren't gone for just a short period of time. So when they go back, all of these vineyards that used to belong to their tribe and their family and their home, they're not theirs anymore. People have moved in and they've assimilated in. And that was one of the big problems, that was one of the reasons that the Jews and the Samaritans knocked heads. Because the Samaritans took sides against the Jews as they were being driven from their homeland. Then they would come in and they would take a portion of it, and from that point on, there was nothing good between the Jews and the Samaritans. And that's the reason. Okay? So anyway, they're going back home. So in Palestine, the Jews in the area, they had a different sense of what the Messiah was going to be. They had a different sense about what kind of personification he would take. What his purpose was different from, say, the Jews that were not living in Israel, Judah, more the southern kingdom, obviously. The people that were living under the diaspora, the people that had decided not to go back home, their idea of the Messiah was different than the people who were living in Palestine. Okay? Those are the two main areas. There were some others, but those are the two main areas that we're going to talk about here for just a couple of moments. All right, so the two different lines. I'll call this out because I want to make sure that everybody can understand what we're going to say. Now, we'll say this. Part of this has to do with the idea of apocalyptic literature. Now, what's apocalyptic literature? What does apocalyptic mean? It means it's hidden, right? Okay. The idea of this literature that was written, and it meant something to the people that was being written to, but if you were not if you weren't given to understand that, it would be hidden to you. Don't be confused. This is not, a lot of people want to take it to mean something far more mystical than it is. But all it means is that it was written in language that was not to be understood by everybody. It was hidden. Okay. Now, just a little bit of an aside. After 70 A.D., after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, after 70 A.D., apocalyptic literature was outlawed under Judaism. They didn't allow. It was outlawed. You weren't allowed to write that kind of literature anymore. Part of that is the idea of control. We want to control what's being written. We want to control what's being read by the people. We don't want this couched language. We don't want this hidden language. If it's going to be written, it's going to be written very, for everybody to see and understand. Okay. One reason was that it wasn't as necessary as it used to be. Okay. The idea of, you look at the book of Ezekiel, very much hidden language, something that was not given for everybody to understand. It was something that would be revealed at another time. The idea of the book of Revelation, apocalyptic literature. It was written in language that could be understood by the people that was sent to, but anyone who would just pick it up. Look at the difficulty even today people have when they read Revelation. Man, there's so much miscommunication and misunderstanding about the book of Revelation. And we saw that when we studied the book, didn't we? About 3 years ago. I looked that up the other day. It was about 3 years ago we studied Revelation. And you start looking and you go, I didn't know that's what that means. That's the point. You weren't supposed to understand. It was something that the people who got it would understand. But anyway, after 70 A.D., this type of literature, this hidden language and all this kind of stuff, the Jews outlawed it. They said, no, Now, the writing began to be done by a very specific group of people. Talmudic scribes. Rabbinical literature became the norm rather than this hidden literature. But what material we do have from this area was probably preserved by Jews that would have been considered heretics by their friends, by the mainstream Jew. They were heretics. You're not supposed to have this. You're not supposed to preserve this. This is outlawed. You're not even supposed to be reading this type of thing. As well as probably first century Christians who applied this idea of the Messiah to the material that they were reading from the time. Have I thoroughly confused everybody? Have I? I'm sorry. If you got any questions, let me know. I'll be happy to explain it. Yes?
Is that my name was the AD 70 that Christ has already come and all this kind of stuff, or this totally something different?
This is something different, but that is a doctrine that started. It's been around. I think I preached on it about 2-3 months ago. It's been around actually for quite some time, but it's just started to make a resurgence in the church, unfortunately. But that's the problem. All right. Because of this literature and everything that was being read and everything that was being written, there is no one clear picture of the Messiah from this time. There's no one clear, shining example of this is what all Jews thought the Messiah was going to be. This is what everybody believes that the Messiah is. There was no common idea or common thought regarding the Messiah. Where's the problem with that? How's that a problem? If there's not one clear idea of the Messiah, what can happen? When he comes, they're not going to recognize him because he's not coming in the way. Once again, perception versus reality. We always believed that the Messiah would come like this, and when he didn't, how do we know he's the true Messiah? Now, is that an excuse? No. He amply, over and over again, he amply displayed his position as the Messiah. I mean, just in the way he spoke and the things that he was able to do, he completely showed himself to be the Messiah. However, when people have something in their minds, right? When they have something in their minds, it doesn't matter what's going on. Many times they're just not willing to give up that mindset. Okay. Same thing when we talk to people about the church. We talk to people about Christ. They have something in their mind. They're set on that idea. They're set on that standard. And it doesn't matter what we're saying to them. This is what I have in my mind, and I'm going to disregard what you have to say because this is how I see this. This is how I've always seen this. This is how my parents taught me. This is how my preacher taught me. This is how my grandparents. I'm not going to differ. I'm not going to differ from this. Well, here's the truth. And sometimes you'll even see their eyes get wide when they read something and realize, okay, they've got it. They've got it. They've got it in their minds. And then you kind of push and say, okay, well, what do you think? And then they make those fateful statements. Well, I just don't think. I just don't believe. This is not what I. And then they're gone. They're done because they can't give up that mindset, that idea. And this is the same thing. This happened during the time of Christ when he came and he walked this earth. This is the issue. You had people who were seeing him as a particular thing and nothing else, and that was. For that reason, in many cases, they just discarded him as the Messiah. They believed him to be a good teacher. You notice that. Even the Pharisees, the scribes, they said, "Oh, this man, they perceived he knew the truth, but they discarded him as the Messiah to their eternal chagrin." Let's just say. All right. Okay. So let's look at this. I'm trying to think about the best way to do this. Okay. Now, we'll get, like I said, we're going to get a little deeper. Raise your hand if you need me to explain something or if you didn't catch what I said. All right. I'm going to erase some of this. But leave some of it. All right. Any one person, if you went to any one person during this time and you asked them, what is your concept? What is your messianic concept? What is your idea of the Messiah? What it comes down to, we'll use one of those words that it's a $20 word, but it's important to know because we've used it before. It all comes down Their idea of the Messiah, any one person, if you ask any person individually, you say, how do you see the Messiah as he's going to appear, as he's going to be sent? It all comes down to the eschatology of the particular Jew. Now, here's the question. It's a $20 word, but it means something very simple. What's eschatology? All right, we know that eschatology is a study, right? All right. I didn't mean to do that. It comes down to this. End times. Simple. Eschatology simply means a study of the end of days, the end of the age. All right. What age are we living in now? We're living in it's the end. This is the end times. Now, you ask a lot of people, especially in the denominational world, what do you understand about end times? Boy, you'll get all kinds of explanations, right? Oh, we're still waiting on the rapture. Then we're waiting on the millennial reign. And then some people believe there's going to be a millennial reign, then there'll be a rapture. Some people believe that Christ is going to come and reign for 1,000 years. Then and there's just so many misconceptions, so much information about the idea of the end times. But you know, the study of the end times goes back as far as God's people in Israel, right? Their concept of what does it mean for the end of days, and their idea of the end of days was something different. How many people do you think, when the Babylonians are bearing down on them with all of these men, with this fearsome army, and here's Judah with just a very few people they can even put into to battle? Do you think that so many people there were honestly saying to themselves, this is it? This is the end times. This is when God destroys us. This is when God takes us out of the way and He makes room for another. Yeah, there were those who believed that. They didn't think that they were going to survive this. They certainly didn't think that God was going to allow them to be taken away and then allowed to come back home. They thought that this was the end of them. We had our day in the sun. God is now allowing us to be destroyed, and He will raise up another nation as He raised us up, and they will occupy what we once had, and that's where we are. That's the extent of it. All right. So the idea of end times was going on way before we ever got a hold of it and tried to mangle it around. I mean, they were thinking about this. But when you talk to in that time, that intertestamental first century Jew, you would ask him, what does it mean? What does the Messiah mean? What does He mean? It would all depend on how their view of end times was. That's where they derived their idea of the Messiah. What would He do? We'll look at a couple of examples tonight. Come on. All right. One thing we want to make sure that we understand what Messiah. All right. What is a Messiah? Well, the Messiah in this literature that they read, this apocalyptic literature that they were reading, the Messiah appears in this literature. It's a technical term as a person who was chosen by God. The idea of chosen by God. This figure that was chosen by God would play an important part in the coming reign of God. You can say, okay, we can understand this. That applies to the church, right? We can see that. Their understanding, of course, was different than ours, because theirs was a little bit different. The Messiah would begin a reign in God's name, which would bring prosperity to the faithful Jews. That was their understanding of a Messiah. Okay. Now, for some, they viewed the Messiah as being related to this world. In other words, He was not divine. He was simply a man who was raised up, and He was put into place so that God's will could be done. God would once again have a part and parcel and have a full hand in the Jewish nation. All right, He would raise them back up from out of the dirt that they found themselves in. He would put them back in their rightful place as God's people, not just in name only, but in a world stage. That was their concept of it. Okay, He would be a national political leader who would lead God's people in a great battle. Well, we'll see in a couple of moments that does kind of play into what some people thought. We'll see what happens in a couple of minutes. All right. So we have one. It's a national leader, political leader, great warrior. He would lead God's people on the battlefield. Now, others, because their idea of the end times was a little bit different, they saw the Messiah as something else. They saw Him as transcendental. They saw, in other words, transcendental means what? He transcends what? the earthly plane. He's not confined to the earthly. He transcends the earthly. He transcends the idea of being physical and mortal. Okay, well, that sounds more like our Messiah, doesn't it? Jesus Christ was transcendental. He went from being a preternal, eternal, divine being to taking the form of a man. Then he died on this earth, and then once again went back to his true form, and now sits at the right hand of God. That sounds more like the Messiah we understand, right? So he was transcendental. He was universal. He was eternal. That kind of sounds more like ours. Why? Well, because our view of the end times is a little bit different than the people who were living back then. You know, we have what do we have now that they did not have? Yeah, we didn't have the inspired books of the New Testament that explain a great deal of this. You know, they didn't have those. You know, all the prophecy that was given to them was not yet complete. We have great deal more than that. You know, that's what John was trying to tell them. You know, repent, because what? Kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's coming. When it says at hand, it means it's not like, you know, in a couple hundred years, guys, be ready because it's coming. You know, even Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is nigh. It's coming. It's right here. And it was what, you know, after he perished, after he died and was resurrected and ascended, it was only about 20 days between the time he ascended back to heaven and the time that the first century church came into being. Okay? So their understanding of end times was a little bit different at that point. All right. So let's look at this for just a couple of moments. Tell you what. I will say this. The idea of the Messiah, you know, we talked about the earthly Messiah. This is more likely this. An earthly warrior. Political. Why is that? Why would that be applicable to the Jews in Palestine? Yeah, they were living in Palestine, and who had the rule over them? Who had the rule over the Jews in Palestine? Rome, right? Yeah. Yeah, the Romans. First it was, you know, all of these you know, they were basically batted back and forth. And I'm talking about the intertestamental period now. So you had a great many foreign enemies that kept coming in, but they were not allowed to have their own homeland. They just lived there. You know, they were not what they once were. So they were looking for this earthly warrior, this political figure that was going to rise up and restore them back to where they were. However, the Jews that were living under the diaspora, they were living elsewhere, they weren't as concerned about a political leader, right? They weren't living in a place where they felt they needed to have the political power and have the land and the nation back. So they were looking at the one that was more transcendental. Okay, the eternal, right? The one that was he was simply going to usher in a better age for them. He was going to usher in something that was far greater than what they had known before. So these were the two differences. Okay, but I want to get into something a little bit different. All right. All right. Anybody need this? Okay. All right. So, two main schools of thought. One, there was the idea of the Levitical Messiah. And the Davidic Messiah. All right. What do you think the idea of the Levitical Messiah would be? Where would the Messiah come from? Yeah, the Levites. All right. All right. The Davidic Messiah. Seed of David. Yeah. Lion of Judah. Forgive my handwriting. Okay. We're going to read from some work that's not canon. It's not found in the Scriptures. In 1 Maccabees, you can't turn to 1 Maccabees, can you? 1 Maccabees, chapter 14 and verse 41. During the period of the Maccabees, now I think I'm going to do a whole different study on that because this was a very important time in the Jews' existence. Basically, the Maccabees really kept them from being utterly destroyed. I mean, really did. Physically destroyed. They mounted a revolt that basically repelled a foreign invader, and they set up their own kingdom. They were self-ruled for the first time in many, many years, and they basically started a theocracy. They were hearkening back to the old days when the law of God ruled everything having to do with the Jews' life, with the Hebrews' life. No matter what they dealt with, no matter if it was with a friend, whether it was a family member, whether it was another nation, whatever it was, they went by the law. And the law as we understand the law, the old law. That's what they went by. So the Maccabees was, while First Maccabees, Second Maccabees is not what we would consider to be divinely inspired, it does have a great deal of history to it. So there's just a little bit of information. But during this period of the Maccabees, the desire was that God would raise up a figure for the delivery of the Jews from the Syrian threat. There's a threat by Assyria to come, once again, enslave them, and the hope was that God would raise up this Messiah. Okay? So when you think about that kind of Messiah, what kind of Messiah do you think they were thinking of? The transcendental, eternal, one to usher in a spiritual realm? They're looking for the one we were talking about, right? The political leader, right? The strong one, the warrior, all right? Since the Maccabees were not from the tribe of Judah, kind of throws us into a problem, doesn't it? All right? Yeah, it doesn't work. Messiah was supposed to come from the tribe of Judah. But we see that during the Maccabees were not of the tribe of Judah. So what they did was, instead of saying, okay, we're going to look for one from the tribe of Judah, what they'll do is they'll change their expectation. Okay? Now we think that maybe God will raise him up from the Levites, okay? From the tribe of priests. Okay? All right, so this was a hope for a Levitical Messiah, one come from the Levites. And all of these hopes centered on Simon Maccabee. And if you want to do a little study, like I said, I might speak on that sometime soon. The hope centered on Simon Maccabee as an anointed one of God. And Simon was viewed as, in 1 Maccabee 14:41, it says also that the Jews and priests were well pleased that Simon Maccabee, should be their governor and high priest forever until there should arise a faithful prophet. So Simon's reign as governor of the Jews at that time was viewed as a messianic. He was a Messiah. All right? Because Simon showed them how to win battles. He was a warrior. He was both a warrior and he was a priest, so they were fine with him acting in that capacity. All right? Simon arose to the office of high priest after being a warrior and a battle commander that helped them to dispel this Syrian threat. And he was responsible for the removal of Syrian taxation. Do you think that had a little bit to do with his popularity? Yeah, I can imagine. Especially Syrian taxation. It's one thing to pay taxes to your own people and to have that money used for the use of your own people. But when it's going to a nation that wants to enslave you and destroy you, the idea of paying taxes is a little bit distasteful. Okay? So what he was able to do is throw off that yoke of Syrian taxation. Made him a huge hero. And you talk to the Jews today, and they're very quick to tell you that Maccabees it's a very important book because it once again shows their ability to overcome, the odds. Okay, much like the book of Esther, you'd be surprised how important the book of Esther is to the Jews. Very important because it shows that no matter what happens, someone's going to arise that's going to fulfill God's the need that they have. God would raise someone else up. All right. So in the book of Jubilees, and we're not going to read this, but in the book of Jubilees, the writer of the book of Jubilees believes that the future hope of Israel did not lie in the house of David, but in the house of Levi. All right. And like Simon Maccabee, the Levitical Messiah was going to be a priestly Messiah, not a kingly Messiah. Okay. So that's the first one, and we're going to finish there because we're going to run out of time. Next week we're going to talk about the idea of the Davidic Messiah. All right. We know that Jesus couldn't fulfill that. Why? What tribe was he from? Tribe of Judah, referred to as the Lion of Judah. Okay, so we know that Jesus, and so you can see where somebody who had the idea of the Levitical Messiah would not regard Jesus as the Messiah, right? Why? Wrong tribe. We're looking for a Levitical Messiah. What tribe are you from? Well, I'm from Judah. Well, you can't be the Messiah. You know, we're looking for a priest. The interesting thing is, what is Jesus now for us? He's a high priest. He's our high priest. And he's a perfect high priest. Unlike the high priest that we read about in Scripture, who sinned. You know, they had to purify themselves before they would go before God. They had issues. I mean, you look at some of the issues that the priests had, and the priest had become corrupted. Even the high priest. Look at the way the high priest acted when Paul went before them in Caesarea. Okay, you had the high priest commanded him to be struck, and that was against the law. Under Jewish law, you weren't allowed to do that to captives that were under arrest. If they were standing in court, you could not strike them. There are things that you could not do. They were holding court in a way that was unacceptable. So you had the priest that had corrupted the office. So, we have a high priest that's never sinned in the manner that we have. So, all right, we're going to finish there. All right, next week, the Davidic Messiah. So, be looking forward to that. Any questions? Like I said, I know sometimes it seems like it's just some, Yeah. Yeah, it explains a lot, doesn't it? We think, why? It's so simple. It's so obvious. How could you not recognize this man as who he was? Well, when you've been taught for generations that the Messiah was going to come from the tribe of Levi, and you hear about this Jesus, but he's of the tribe of Judah, and it was back then you knew what tribe you were from. That was something that was drilled into you, and you could go back generation after generation after generation. I mean, the temple held all the records, so you knew this Jesus, he's of Judah. Just based on where he's from. He's from the city of David, Bethlehem. So how in the world could he be the Messiah? Well, once again, when you're taught wrong for generations, the expectation doesn't always meet reality. And unfortunately, rather than changing your perception, you want to change the reality. And that doesn't work either. So, all right. No questions? We'll finish up. Yeah. Well, I mean, you think about, like I said, when you've been taught all of your life that this is the way that the gospel works. You've been taught all your life that this is how you become a Christian. You've been taught all your life this is how you worship. You've been taught all of your life all of these things. And then when someone comes to you with the truth, the gospel truth, the literal gospel truth, I think oftentimes we're very hard on people. Why can't you understand this? Well, I've been taught all my life that that's not right. That's not correct. And for some people, it's very difficult, and a lot of people, unfortunately, because that's what's happened, they just disregard. They discard the truth because it doesn't fit their perception. Yeah, it's more comfortable. More comfortable. You don't feel like you're betraying anybody. If I do this, I'm betraying everything my mom and dad taught me. I'm betraying everything that I learned from my preacher. I'm betraying everything, and Yeah. Yep. All right. All right, let's finish. We're going to have a song of invitation, 382, and we invite anyone who needs the prayers of the congregation in any way. We've been able to pray for so many, and it's been effective. People are well that were not well, and they're getting around that they weren't getting around. So prayer works. So if we can pray for you, let us know while we stand and while we sing.
Christ, me today.